Hello, and I am interviewing the wonderful Darrelyn Gunzburg about her brilliant book, Grief, A Dark Sacred Time. This book took me by surprise because I thought it was going to be kind of a woo-woo book about the grieving process, but actually it's quite heavily academic. It's filled with stories of courage and difficulty and triumph over adversity, and I'm really eager to speak to Darrelyn about her experience of writing the book, because it must have been a very arduous experience. So Darrelyn, can you tell me a little bit about the process that you underwent to write this book?
Yes, good question, and thank you, Alex. Thank you so much for setting up this podcast. It's lovely to be able to talk about the process of grief and what it is without holds, and we'll get into that shortly, I'm sure. Well, it was just that it was the book I was looking for. All the books on grief that I had looked at, and there's masses in libraries now on Amazon, are mostly of two kinds. One is either I've been through this terrible experience and this is how I got out of it. I blogged my way, I walked my way, I flew my way, I did this, I did that, the other. And so it's a personal journey. Or it comes from case books of doctors, and so therefore it's very clinical. But in working with clients with grief that I had found, it was a totally different experience. It was about recognizing that grief takes time and finding a way to be able to place that grief into a long time period for them, and not telling them that it was going to get better any day now, because it wasn't. My first experience of grief, which you probably found in the book, came from when my grandfather died at 12, and 12 is a crucial age for young boys and girls growing up, because it's the liminal space into adolescence. And so
it's the brain development time.
Major incidents that Yes. And so all sorts of things are happening. And so major events that happen at that time really impact on a person. And I didn't realize how that had impacted on me. So when I came to understand that grief, which I struggled with over a long period of time, trying to unpack what it was and not really understanding it at all, and then finally did understand it, and then saw it reflected in the clients I was seeing, and therefore grappled with how to help them through helping myself. So it's a bit of a reverse process to other books.
Absolutely. As I said, I was very surprised. Can you tell me a little bit about how mythology can teach us about the grief process?
Absolutely, yes. We live our life in story. Story is all around us. And when, even in you asked me how I came to write the book, I told you the story. I fitted it into various events that made sense to me in a narrative. And we live our life in story. And all the great stories of the world, all the great cultures have these myths. They will be something, for example, Plato's Timaeus is about the myth of how the world came into being. We try to seek ways of understanding things we don't understand and which are beyond our comprehension by placing it into a narrative. And myth is another way of doing that. There are myths about cosmology and cosmogony, and there are also myths about how we as people try to grapple with the world and understand it. And mental health, which is such a big focus today, is one of the issues that grief encapsulates. It's about dealing with something that we have no idea how to deal with because it's not a common occurrence in our life. And so we struggle to know the material understanding of it, what's happening in our world around us, but we don't understand necessarily the internal process. But the ancients did, and they would place it into a story that made sense of it. Something which they didn't understand was a monster. Grief for them, as I've articulated in the book, was a shape changer because it wasn't something that could be grasped onto and understood by the rational mind. So I think myths are very powerful in helping us today to understand that process, because we can relate to that story because it's something that is different and unusual. And if we understand that story over here, as it were, then we understand it internally.
Yes, I'm really glad you touched on that, because we all have different stories to tell, and our culture and where we live in the world has a huge influence on the stories that we tell to other people. And I'm wondering about cultural differences in death. For example, in my own culture, I mentioned to you I was half German, but my other half is I'm Ojibwe Indian, and in our culture, if we experience a grief, we cut our hair. And I went through a time in my life where I experienced a number of different bereavances, and I had to keep my hair short over a long period of time. And, you know, I essentially had to face my grief every time I looked in the mirror.
Yes.
And, you know, different things too. My experiences in India, being in Varanasi and seeing, you know, how they burn the bodies and they experience that grief, and West Indian burials where the family actually buries the bodies. You know, they don't let the grave digger bury the bodies. They actually get in there. And I just wonder, if you can contribute any other differences across cultures to the bereavement process.
Well, there's two that come to mind. One is Greek response. Certainly they will dress in black, Italians as well. Once a woman loses her husband, that's it. No matter how young she is, she tends to dress in black. I mean, that might be different now with the younger generation, but that's certainly a focus for them. And so everyone in the community knows that this person is in grief, just like you with your hair, which is wonderful. Because those visual signs do alert us that this person is in a different space and needs to be treated differently, with respect and with courage and with love, not pushed away. There is one of my clients said to me that, you know, in the first year of her grief, people would cross the road so they didn't have to speak to her. And this was someone who was just dressed normally. It's just shocking. So that's the first one that springs to mind. And the second one is that, and my background is Jewish, and so when I went to my father's funeral back in '94, I was not allowed to partake of anything to do with the funeral service, apart from just following along and standing to one side. And I found that anathema. And I had picked, we grew olive trees in the back of our house, and I'd picked some olive leaves from the house that we lived in and a few other things, and I wanted to throw them into the grave. We were allowed to actually spade a piece of a bit of earth into the grave, and so I just spaded it in and then threw it in straight after. I could see the rabbi looking in shock at what I had done, and I thought, this is not right. This is not right. So there are very distinct mores about how to approach and deal with the dead. I love that story about where the people themselves who've lost someone close to them are allowed to bury the body. Yeah. So
yeah, we have a very commercial way of dealing with death, I think. And my early experiences with an academic approach to bereavement was looking at how the funeral directors try to play on guilt to get grief-stricken people to buy a better coffin or to buy a vault. And I think through books like yours, I think we're coming away from this, and we are able to look death, as it were, in the eye, and we're able to accept it as a part of the human experience. I know your book is not astrological, but I just want to say that astrology gives us the opportunity to look at the human life cycle in all its blazes and glories, and all its troughs as well. And the death process is something that astrologers have to deal with in our practices and with the people that our clients. And so I think that you are very much helping people come to terms with what is a natural part of the human cycle. But the question is, how do people return to the normal life after a major bereavement, if they actually can?
That's a loaded question, Alex. They can't. There is no such thing as a normal life.
Yes, yeah.
There is no such. There is whatever a person experienced before the loss. The definition of grief is that the person is dealing with and trying to understand the emotional responses to loss and adjusting to the situation. And so therefore, life after grief is never, ever going to be the same. It's not a fast process. I'm sure people who've experienced grief know it is intense at first, and then things seem to get a little easier, but that's only because the aspects of the body are stepping in and helping the person deal with the immediacies, the funeral service, working out what has to be done with all the accounts that need to be closed, etc. So it gives a person a stay of grace to be able to do that with some sort of rationality, and they think that that's how it's going to be. But usually those natural narcotics wear off after about 4 to 6 weeks, and that's when people start to think that you must be getting better, you must be feeling better, and of course it's not. And that first year, the person is encountering every single anniversary of the person they've lost.
Yeah.
And so it can be quite disconcerting. And that first year is really just shaking the ground. But this can be worse because that's when no one is around to help or understand. They don't talk about it. They don't allow the person to keep articulating and reliving those memories. But depending on the relationship of the person that you lost, it can be anywhere of between 2 to 5 years. That's a long, long process. And it's swampy and it's solid and it's confusing and it's happy and joyful. But if the person does the work of grief in the moment that those memories assail them, then they have got a chance of sieving the intense emotions and letting those settle, and then just holding on to the memories that are warm and dear. So as with any process of change, as with any deep ritual, the person has to take themselves out of the normal life and allow the disintegration, and then allow somebody to come back into their life, the tribe in which they're part of, and tell people what they found. This is always a ritual process. I went and I was initiated here, and this is what I've brought back. This is the jewel I brought back. But the jewel that we bring back is about how to deal with grief, and people don't want to know that. So it's a difficult process, and people learn to button their lips and not talk about things, and so it gets iterated down the generations unless we can stop it, unless we can break the cycle.
And it's odd too, being a teacher.
So there is no return to a normal.
Yes, I understand. And being a teacher, I know that my children play games where they kill people in the virtual world, and they're surrounded by this. They see cartoons, or they watch movies, but the actual reality of a death can be something that is they often can't talk about, because adults tell them that their loved one has gone to sleep, or they tell them that they've gone to heaven. So I wonder if you can give a little bit of insight into how the differences between the grieving process of an adult is different to the grieving process of a child, and how we as adults, the authority figures, can help our young people deal with the actual death of a loved one.
It's a good question, Alex. It's a really good question, because to be honest with you, there's no difference. It's just how we handle it. And if we as children have not been shown a good role model from our parents about how to deal with grief, how to discuss and talk openly through the whole process, how to view the body, how to be with the person who's dying, how to then allow that when they've died to sit with the body and be with them, and then how to deal with the body, the human remains, and then how to talk about it, how to articulate that. If we've not been given good role models, then when we grow up to be adults ourselves, we're going to simply follow the model that our parents gave us. Children are very resilient. They are very curious. They're very open. And if we can get them to talk about things, there's really only two questions to ask, and keep asking when you do the work grief. One is, what do you still want to say to the person? Because life keeps going in our own head about what would happen if we have plans to do this. If a little kid loses their best friend, they're still going to expect them to be there the next day, and not having them there is the confusion that they need to deal with. And the other thing is, did you regret anything in your connection with that person? Because regret can keep taking you back and back and back into a guilt cycle, and that does no one any good. But if you can talk about what you regretted doing, I really hated it when we fought, and I beat him up and I broke his arm, or I did something like that, then the person learns that that they can talk about it, and the talking actually diffuses the situation. So yes, I think the answer is that an adult has to deal with their own loss first, any unresolved losses first, and then be prepared. If they haven't, then be prepared to let the child spark those unresolved losses, and maybe share those with the child, and to simply say, your emotions are giving rise to my emotions, but when I lost my mother. And then the sharing becomes really deep and enriched, because you've got a generational divide that's being crossed and being enriched and given a resource that the child can then draw on later when he or she has a child. Remember that was a deep experience when they bond deeply with their parent. Yeah. So
yeah, great answer. Thank you.
There's
and just thinking about what we tell children, about heaven and the afterlife. Do you think that a belief in the afterlife helps or hinders the grieving process?
I think it can give solace. I think it can be a reassuring thing, but it doesn't stop the work of grief, which is here in the moment, what did I still want to say to the person, and what do I regret saying? And how can I talk about how I'm feeling? I've had a lot of experience with clients who have had dreams of their person, the loved one who's died, coming back. Myself have had that experience as well. There's a richness that happens through the dream life, and dreams is a big subject to talk about, the nature of dreams, because there are very different types of dreams. But that, I think, helps to make a bridge into another connection with the one who's died. And that connection, whether we call that the afterlife or whether we call it the current life in another form, whatever it is, if it's helpful and valuable to the person, then I think it's good. I think it can help. It can reassure and it can nourish. Yeah.
Yes, I think it's important, that without crossing over into a fantasy life, I think that the going to church or creating a ritual or honoring dreams is so important, because we have to go on. We have to survive somehow. We have to somehow fill that great big gaping hole that comes through a bereavement, and that the hole will never be completely filled, but life does go on and time does go on, and eventually we find ourselves where we can, I think, where we can understand that we it's hard to explain that, even I'm struggling to to explain the grieving process. That we don't have to feel guilty because we survived. We can move forward in our lives and understand that our loved ones would want us to move on in our lives, and they wouldn't want us to be stuck in the past or to be stuck in this horrible, upset world of the shock of the death or whatever, because death is always a shock, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I mean, no matter how long that process is, it's always a shock when we wake up and realize that person's no longer in our world.
Yes, absolutely. And therefore, as much as possible, what death teaches us is, in the moment, make sure that this is a good thing. This is a good present moment with the one you love, because a profound and rather shocking thought is, what happens if the person just dies suddenly now? How are you with that person? Are you in a good space with them? Have you said everything you want to say to them? Have you been kind to them? Have you been generous to them? Have you loved them? Have you let them know that? Have you cleared the air? And it's always about keeping things clean and clear. And then if death does happen, then the grief, whilst intense and upsetting, is whole. It's not full of ragged things that haven't been completed or said. It's a very confronting thing to talk about these issues. It's confronting enough when you say to someone, have you got all your things in order in case you died suddenly? But it's also confronting to talk about those deep emotional issues that need to be resolved before the person dies, between you, so that the love is whole and continues to be whole, despite the intense eruption to the world that's just happened.
You know, it's interesting that social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter have a memorial. You know, in case you die, who's going to take over your account?
Right.
You know, I think we're getting better, but we're not in any way a culture in the West where we prepare for death. I don't think.
Yeah.
I still think we're far too youth oriented, and I think that. You know, the reality of death is not something that we deal with very well.
Yes, I agree with you. Yeah.
Is there anything else that you would that we've missed that you would like to add? Because you know, I'm feeling like I need a cup of tea and.
I know it's very intense, but it's wonderful that you've made the space available to talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you. You're the one who did the research. You know, as I said, let me put the book up again. It's not what you expect. It's obviously very well researched. There is no woo-woo in this. It looks death in the eye, and you know, I think it's something that should be on the bookshelves of any university course dealing with bereavement, and it's something that definitely astrologers should read. And you know, well done to Margaret Cahill, the publisher of Wessex Astrologer, you know, for putting this together, and you as well. You know, thank you for all your research. Obviously, you've worked very hard on this for a long time.
Well, thank you, Alex. Thank you very much. I guess what would help is if people do buy it and read it, put something on Amazon.
Absolutely. It's how important is it to put stuff on Amazon, yeah, to talk about death with your loved ones and not sterilize it and make it seem like something that might happen someday. It is going to happen to all of us. We all have to go through this, and which is another reason why this book is so important. Death is inevitable. On that happy note, Darrelyn. Thank you so much. May it sell 1 million copies.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you. Namaskar.
May it help people.
Yes, absolutely.
Namaste.